Welcome to Figure Eight, where we feature inspiring stories of women entrepreneurs who have grown their businesses to 7 and 8 figures revenue. If you're in the mix of growing a bigger business, these stories are for you. Join us as we explore where the tough spots are, how to overcome them, and how to prepare yourself for the next portion of the climb. I'm your host, Julie Ellis. I'm an author, entrepreneur, and a growth and leadership coach who co-founded, grew, and exited an 8-figure business. This led me to exploring why some women achieve great things. And that led to my book, Big Gorgeous Goals. Let's explore the systems, processes, and people that help us grow our businesses to new heights. If you're interested in growing your business, this podcast will help. Now, let's get going. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Figure Eight. Today, I'm talking with Erika MacKay. And Erika is a workspace wellness expert and an advocate for spaces that help us feel and perform at our best. She's a registered interior designer, and she's really got a lot of experience in what I would say is the new workplace of today. So she's the founder and the CEO of Niche for Design. And right now she's focused on growing the impact of her team, the impact of her business, and growing her team. She loves to be a part of working on hybrid offices and flexible co-working spaces, and the opportunity to have how we create connection in those spaces and how we create connection in a hybrid work environment. So her business venture is really about embodying what the new work experience looks like. I am excited to talk to her today. And so welcome, Erika.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. So why don't you tell me a little bit about how you started in interior design and then how you came to sort of niche into the design area that you're in now?
Yeah, so I have always been interested, we'll say, bordering on obsessed, even as a child, with how we can optimize space and kind of how the spaces we spend time in impact us and change the way we feel and how our day kind of functions, to the point that I was that kid drawing floor plans in all of my notebooks in like elementary school, and just everywhere I was, that just seemed to be top of mind for whatever reason. And so as a kid, I thought I would be an architect, was kind of my original plan. And then I discovered interior design and realized that that level of detail and intricacy in the built environment and that focus on the interior spaces was really appealing to me. So I went to school for interior design and worked in a few different areas of the industry. Worked for government, worked for an architect, did some hospitality design, hotels for a bit, which was a cool experience, and then started my company in 2012. And initially, like a lot of companies, I think we sort of did a bit of everything, which worked out well to start to get a feel of where we wanted to focus. But it became evident pretty early on that the needs of a commercial client are different than a residential client, and we wanted to focus on that area. That, coupled with some of my kind of family business experience in the office furniture world, kept pulling me back into workspace design. And workspaces, it's an area we spend, whether they're home or in a traditional office, it's a space that we spend a lot of time in typically. And it's a time in our lives where we're trying to really function optimally. And so I started to discover that there's a lot of ways that we can really intentionally impact through design the way that our spaces support us, to help us be more productive, to help us be healthier, and to help us really just excel more in the work that we're trying to do. So that's kind of been the path that's taken us to this niche of specifically commercial design and workspace wellness. And there's actually a really well-established building standard called the Wellbeing standard that some of your listeners may have heard of. It was developed by a kind of aligned group to LEED, which is a sustainability standard, but it focuses on human health. It was established in 2016. I discovered it in 2018, and we were already kind of talking about this as being the way that we approach design. And so it just aligned so perfectly. And that has really, really been a lens that we've been continuing to develop and build into the way we approach projects. So that's something I'm really passionate about. It makes a lot of sense for me. And Well gave us like the science behind it and all of that information, which is cool.
Well, and it's so interesting because I think back to, when you went through when I started working and coming in through the first part of the 2000s, and there was a lot of talk about ergonomics and how your desk was
Yeah.
set up, and for the health of your physical body. But what you're talking about really encompasses a lot more than that.
Yes, ergonomics is part of it for sure. And we had so many conversations through the pandemic, especially about that. So many people just kind of went home and sat at their dining room table
Or
for
in their
8 hours a day
bed
or
or on their
more.
couch or
Yes,
yeah.
even worse. Yeah. Okay, for a short period of time, sometimes I like a change of scenery too, but it is not positive in terms of impact on our bodies to be doing that on a regular basis. So yeah, ergonomics is important, but there are a lot of other aspects. So things like lighting, for example, and access to natural light is one of the big ones. Um, Also looking at the purpose of the space and the layout of the space in terms of distractions. So being very intentional about how we're zoning things so that we don't have acoustical distractions or visual distractions to be dealing with. We've had a lot of instances where it's just things people don't think about. Who's walking by you when you're trying to focus, and kind of coming into your peripheral vision and pulling your mind away from
Mhm.
things.
Well, and I'm laughing as you say that because I sit facing out the window to the street in front of my house. So I see all my neighbors walking by with their dogs and all the things. And yes, I do have blinds and I do make use of them because it does get distracting for sure.
Yeah, it's good that you can see outside. That's really, there are some real significant values there. Even from a stress management standpoint, there's research to suggest if we can view nature and be able to look up and see like out into the distance into nature can be really beneficial. But yes, sometimes you need to be able to pull the blind
Yep.
and do the focus. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. And it feels so, I mean, it's funny to sit here in 2024 and think about how timely your vision was when you really started to go down the road and get well certified and all of those things, because I think the office environment is changing really quickly right now.
It is for sure. And there was a moment through the pandemic where it was really heavily focused on safety for good reason. And so Well actually followed along with that with a lot of strategies around, germ mitigation and air quality monitoring. And that's still a big part of Well and some of what we talk to with our clients. But it's the office, the purpose of the office has just changed so much. This was starting a bit before the pandemic, but we've expedited it significantly over the last 4 years for sure. And it's just really that understanding that we don't need an office space for the tools anymore. We all have computers at home. We don't need access to the file cabinet or the photocopier. It's not about that anymore. It's about connection. That's really the point. And that's super valuable. And I think we're really just scientifically speaking, we're really just starting to understand the full breadth of that impact and how it can impact an organization at a really core level. And so companies are starting to look at like, what does that really mean? Because it's not a one size fits all situation, really. What does it mean for us? And even I find it really interesting. I've been reading a lot about companies who are fully remote. And yeah, and that can be a really wonderful thing from a staffing standpoint, access to talent pool. There's lots of advantages to that. But some of the more successful ones have actually realized that there's so much value for their team to have some in-person interaction. That doesn't mean they need to go into an office every day necessarily or any of that. But they've gotten to the point where they've figured out, and it usually seems to mimic the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, if you're familiar with that. Around 20% of the time, they try to be in person for something.
Right. So by in person, do you mean like opening a video call link where they all join, or no, actually physically in person?
Yeah. So even a lot of these companies are flying in their team members from all over the world to do like a 1 week, a quarter co-working week, or sometimes it's more like team building. It can be a mix of things depending on what kind of work they're doing and how collaborative it inherently is. But they're finding that has, having your team be connected it helps with retention is the really obvious one. And it really impacts the way that they care for your clients because they're kind of everyone's sort of working more in line with each other. So yeah, it's really interesting.
And I have read about trust building among
Yes.
teams is increased in person over
Yeah, and I'm
virtual.
I'm a huge fan of hybrid. I mean, I'm working home right now. We work hybrid. Um,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Same.
I don't believe we ever need to go back just because connection is good to be in the office 5 days a week necessarily. There's some companies where maybe that makes sense, sure. But I think in a lot of cases, it's really taking the opportunity to rethink. Okay, we have all this space. Probably you don't need as much, first of all. So let's optimize it. Look at it through the lens of maybe quality over quantity and also intentionality around what should my team be doing here that is valuable. If they're all just sitting in their own cubicle not interacting with each other, that's not really utilizing what needs to happen in person. So how do you make what needs to happen facilitated?
Yeah, and that's where I think, like I've worked in offices that
Mhm.
are all cubicles and everybody's, in their little square. I have worked in an office that was entirely open and had no walls, which was not a good setup for me. I could not focus in that environment. Too much too much visual stimulation as well as noise for me. And so it is that interesting part though. Now I think about offices being, they're not all one or all the other, are they? They have co-work space, they have private space, they have quiet time space, they have collision areas, and all of the different sort of parts of how we
Yeah,
work.
exactly. And it is a different solution from company to company, depending on how their team operates and what they're going to be doing in office. But at the end of the day, it's a mix of all of these different things. In some area, it might make sense to have some open areas so people can kind of collaborate. There's a reason that people choose sometimes to go work in a coffee shop. Sometimes that energy is good, especially if you're extroverted. But other times we need to be able to hop on a Zoom call in a quiet, non-distracted area. And so ideally, if that's the variety of tasks that are happening in your space, you want to have a space that supports that in a meaningful way. And yeah, yeah. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And what's it been like? So, I mean, you started the business in 2012, and in 2018 you kind of continued to sort of refine that focus. But
Mhm.
what has it been like growing the business to this point?
Yeah. Well, it's been, as with any entrepreneur for sure, a roller coaster of sorts. But I kind of love that. As much as I'm a planner and I like to have the certainty of what's happening next and all of that, it is kind of the strategy and the excitement behind those pivots that makes it interesting. So yeah, and I've built up a really amazing team. The first hire I made was sort of two hires at once, a designer, another designer, and an outsourced bookkeeping and payroll person. So it was like an exercise in understanding your strengths and what you want to be doing, and then also recognizing hiring someone, at least with the technical skills for design, was going to be most versatile to do the different tasks that were relevant for us at that time. And then from there, it's been kind of gradually realizing it's not just about it hasn't just been about hiring on credentials, but I've figured out more and more the importance of hiring based on like attitude and the values and the alignment. And that over the years has been so impactful and so helpful for us because then, I'm not, I don't like to micromanage and I don't need to because regardless, we have lots of processes and systems in place. But even regardless of those, if everyone kind of has a clear understanding of what we're doing, how we want our clients to feel, what's important to us and to those clients, the process is kind of inherent for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a really great way when you think about how you want to build a culture in an organization. It really is about the people that you bring to the table and put on the bus, to use a term that's well known, and then you figure out what is the right seat for everybody.
Yes, yeah, we do. When you say C2, we operate with EOS, so that was a lot of the EOS stuff we were kind of already doing, but that was really a nice tightening and refinement, bringing that in to agree.
Yes, and EOS takes that from good to great.
Totally,
So, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. which is, yeah, and I think it is interesting. And there are some jobs where you do need, a base level of skills has to be present.
Yeah.
But there are so many things that you can teach for somebody that has the right sort of attitude.
Oh yeah. There's always a base level of skills, but yeah, you can't teach attitude. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And so now you have a nice happy addition to your family that's
Yes.
coming along in a couple of months. And so one of the things that we got talking about was what it's like for entrepreneurs to take maternity leave. And I know you're thinking a lot about how you're going to do it and what you're going to do. And so I'm curious to for us to chat a little bit about that.
Yeah, your timing is impeccable because I feel like just in the last few weeks, I'm actually wrapping my head around what the game plan is. So takes some time, and it's, I think, different for every entrepreneur and depending on the way their business is structured. But this is my second. So I'm due with my second in August. And my first was born right in the depths of the pandemic, for better and worse. And so it was a different time then, it was easier in some ways. Like no one really knew I was pregnant. We were only meeting virtually.
Right.
So that's
Because you were
different.
seeing
Yeah.
seeing you in the square.
Yeah. So that was a very different experience from particularly on the like client and business development side of things. Um, but as far as it relates operationally to what's happening, even it was easy for me to come back sooner in some ways because it was all virtual anyways. So I've really had to put some thought into making sure my main goal is that I want to make sure my team feels like they're supported and I'm not disappearing. Obviously, you're never going to be 100% out, but having some clear expectation around what I will be able and willing to do and when, which is it's difficult and it's mainly it's such an unpredictable thing. I don't know exactly what day I will be 100% off.
Right.
Um, but we've figured out kind of who's going to be filling in parts of my role and when, and we'll be transitioning into that at the beginning of August. So there's a bit of a buffer time to so I'm still there, even though I'm not necessarily acting in some of the capacities that I do day to day. And then, yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's so many people ask me about that aren't entrepreneurs, especially ask me about that. Like, oh, that's awful. Like, you don't get to really take a mat leave. And I think at some moments I've felt a little bit of jealousy of like being able to take a typical one, but at the same time, I kind of like that I get to make it my own. And I don't know that I would want to be completely out. Um, I need to be able to keep in it a little bit and keep myself excited and motivated about what we're doing next. And so, yeah, it's a process.
Well, and setting up a team that you can step out and let them continue to run the business for the period of time that you want to take off is a job in itself, really.
For sure. It is for sure. Um, and making sure that they're clear on what that looks like how much you're stepping out and when. I mean, I've at various points been more and less essential day to day, just depending on where we're at with workloading and the team and everything. And to be honest, that's been actually a really wonderful blessing in disguise sort of situation sometimes because it makes sure that you have a clear understanding of how all aspects of the business are operating. And so similarly, I'm approaching it with my team to have similar value. Here's an opportunity to expand your role a little bit and we can kind of see where this goes from here and that might lead to further growth and development for them on an individual basis and as a whole.
Yeah. And it's where I think you can also see the possibilities of, if you want to think about is your business saleable? I mean, that's also a place where the acquirer wants to know the business could run without you. Right? So there are similarities in how you can think about things, but it is that interesting piece of like deciding what you want out of this time after you have the baby and then figuring out how to set the business up so that you aren't sort of dragged back in. You think you're at the end of the emails and the phone for the quick questions, but that can lead to kind of getting dragged back into the deep end too. So how you figure out what you want and set barriers and set people up for success also so that you can be out.
Yeah, and most entrepreneurs, or most that I know anyways, that are building their business, scaling their business intentionally and so forth, that is the goal. You want to be able to pull yourself out of the essential day-to-day stuff. So for me, this is a good we had a big staffing change earlier in the year that did pull me into some more day-to-day than I had been doing in months previous. Which was a good experience, but this is now my opportunity to figure out, okay, have we figured out a new way for me to pull out of this in the short term? And you're right, that is such an amazing opportunity to kind of test that. Like, I'm 37 years old. I'm not retiring anytime soon, but I also think there's merit in giving me the ability to focus as CEO of the company on some of our bigger picture opportunities, the things that aren't necessarily the random phone call in the middle of the day. So it's
Well,
fantastic.
and this strategic thought of, okay, I'm stepping out. How do I want to be when I come back? What do I want my role to look like? Because it's also like an opportunity of you don't have to step back in and do all the things you're doing right now.
Yes,
You have
exactly.
to plan for how you're not going to, but there is a real opportunity in that in terms of, if you can hire the right team, download the work properly and get things working, then when you come back, what is the next realm of possibility that you want to explore?
Absolutely. And we're always writing new processes and refining our processes, but what better way to motivate ourselves to really get things nailed down? The more I can make sure everyone's clear on what they need to do and this process is good, the more I can kind of step out and focus on myself and the baby. And then as I go back in, hopefully be able to do some of the more bigger picture projects that sometimes get back burner otherwise when you're pulled into day to day.
Yeah. And you will, I mean, I think the second mat leave is different than the first one. Like just from a family life perspective, it's a busier and there's more moving parts and all of those pieces as well.
Yes, it is. And we're still working out the intricacies of it, but I'm also very lucky in that we're not a two entrepreneur family, which sometimes is probably a cool thing also. But my husband is able to take some paternity leave too. And I'm so grateful that we live in a time and a place where that is not only possible, but acceptable. Like most of the men on his team have also taken some level of leave when their family's grown. And I think that's just such an amazing opportunity to have. It's really a once in a lifetime, or maybe a couple times in a lifetime opportunity. So and kind of a new phenomenon, even here.
No, I think that's really interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about sort of like workplace design and the link to health and well-being and how you are really working to make a difference for that.
Yeah, that's probably one of our, I wouldn't say challenges, but one of our biggest focuses right now is how do we really continue to align our brand and our presence, but for the purpose of getting that messaging out and that awareness out to people that you can really make a difference in your own individual work life and health by paying attention to the spaces you spend time in. And then also helping leaders, business leaders, understand how that can really be a tool for them to help elevate their team, right? You hear so much about corporate wellness lately in general, and that's a really broad category. And I think it's wonderful that's becoming more of a prevalent priority for companies to really consider how the well-being of their team impacts their business in general and is a worthwhile initiative to put some effort into. And so I think being able our focus and our thinking moving forward is how do we really fit the space into that conversation in a way that makes sense to people outside of our industry. It's easy for us to understand that, but it's something I find people really don't think about until you start talking and having the conversations.
Right, because they just take for granted the space is what it is. Do they not think about how
Yeah.
they can shape it? Why do you think it is that they haven't kind of considered it?
I think there's a few reasons. I think business leaders are, for lack of a better word, busy sometimes. There's just a lot of competing priorities. And as much as I know that the space can support a lot of those priorities, like if there's a financial element of it, of course, there's your retention and your HR element and the productivity of your team and your brand, like all of that kind of intersects. And so I think it's just too low on the list sometimes until it has to be addressed. And so it's very common for us to be brought in on a project when someone's moving or renovating. That's fairly obvious that someone would think to maybe reach out to someone like ourselves. But at the same time, there's also unfortunately a bit of I'll say a misconception or a stereotype in our industry that we bring in a designer and they're just going to they'll make a beautiful space, but they're going to make it complicated and expensive and all of this stuff. And that may be true in certain cases, I suppose, but that is very different than our approach and always has been very different from our approach. We really pride ourselves on being more like, yes, of course, you want the space to be beautiful. And that in and of itself does have an impact, right? We feel good when we walk into a space that's beautiful, but beauty's subjective. So that's a pretty broad goal. And so really looking at, beyond that, beauty is a function to an extent, but beyond that, how do we really create a space that's going to support a business in a meaningful way and is really going to provide something for their team that is beyond what they maybe are thinking is possible. And yeah, there's most people are probably still kind of caught in that. Okay, we need X square feet per person, or how many desks can I fit in here? And so I think there's a long way to go from an education standpoint on really broadening that understanding that, yeah, you probably do need a space. It's very likely that it's the ideal scenario is not for what you're thinking. And so doing that deep dive and that's kind of where we come in. We facilitate that a lot through feasibility studies and needs analysis projects to kind of help a company figure out what do we really need here? What does it
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah, and it's almost like then the number of desks, the number of people, meeting space, like those are more almost like the table stakes of the design. And then it's like, what are the things that actually make the space well and beautiful and vibrant and all of those things, whatever that means to. But those are the things that they never thought about. It was really all the dry number, cut and dried pieces before that were the all that was thought about, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's some um, awareness to be had to eat for a lot of companies to even be open to that. Some are more than others, especially when you start with the realization that you probably could work with less space and less cost, or at least spending the cost in a more like spending the investment in a more intentional way on things your team actually cares about, not more
Yes.
cubicles.
So part of your education process then is sort of teaching people that like what you're doing is not icing on the cake, it's actually the cake. It's actually the most important
Yeah.
thing that they need to be thinking about is that space and the wellness aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. I like that, Julie.
Yeah, well, just thinking that I think a lot of people probably thought that was the extra, right? Like
Absolutely.
that's been but really now in today's environment, it's actually the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure. And that the variety of what that means is a big part of why I think it can feel overwhelming to get into. And that's really where we can provide value. But there's lots of solutions, like even co-working. I think this is a big part of why co-working is gaining prevalence in some industries in particular, because it gives people the some option. You're not committing to a 10,000 square foot lease for 10 plus years. You have some flexibility to grow. It's not co-working is not just for startups anymore. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for companies to look at alternate arrangements such as co-working or offices that maybe don't look like offices, if that makes sense. And thinking about how can space support your operations and kind of wipe the slate. Pretend offices didn't exist. What is it that you need? Call it whatever you want, but yeah,
Right. Which is that like interesting thing for people to wrap their minds around, right? Because offices are just, I mean, it's a function of how space has worked for decades.
exactly. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. I think it's a really interesting place, a little intersection to be at right now in terms of how quickly things have changed, and what the future looks like is different. And as somebody who works from home and is also an extrovert, like co-working and coffee shops, and like those are all ways that I get out of the house. And so I think for companies, though, to create inviting spaces is what will get their workers to want to be coming into the office, and that the human connection and the collisions that happen and all of the things that are there.
Absolutely. And there's a programming piece to that too, which is one of the things I love about Well. There's actually a large HR and operations component to the Well building standard for exactly that reason. It's kind of getting everybody at the table, making sure we understand high level what's needed and are able to accommodate that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so, what's next for Niche for Design? What's next for you? How do you see the business in the future?
Yeah, for sure. So, in a roundabout way, I'm excited that having this baby coming in August is pulling me out of the day to day in a forced manner, but that I'm hoping will bring me back to working on some of our bigger picture projects. We've talked a lot about we're working on a project to open kind of an experience space to help people understand more of what is possible in the office, because a barrier we often see, similar to what you and I have talked about, is that it's hard to even imagine what else is possible because we only know what we've seen for offices. So we're hoping to look into that project as an alignment to the brand, and then just generally being able to be more visible and get the word out there about the opportunity really that exists for companies to kind of look at wellness, look at space as part of their wellness approach. One of the, I forget where I read this statistic. I think it might have been a Well thing, but if you look at corporate wellness initiatives, if you're well certifying or really doing anything to really factor in wellness into the space and people are there, you have an inherent 100% participation in that, right? And so that's a big opportunity in and of itself. And so really helping people understand how to capitalize on that, and looking at our service offering and providing different ways to help businesses do that. Whether or not they're taking on a big reno, it doesn't necessarily need to be that. There are many ways that you can look through the lens of wellness and optimization in making some modifications. It doesn't necessarily mean you're moving or doing anything drastic. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, getting word out into the world. And I think having a lab kind of space would be really interesting for people to go and see and break down their sort of preconceived notions of what it can be.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's some really interesting kind of research and case study opportunities we can do with that. So it's been something we've been working on in the background that's kind of coming together. Yeah, so watch for that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think you're really on the edge of like what the modern workplace is, forming up to look like. And it will be a really interesting journey for you now as you come back and start to really grow this business.
Yes. Thank you, Julie.
It's good. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. We had a great conversation, and I look forward to checking in with you and hearing how baby and the mat leave go. Wishing you all the
Thank
best.
you. Thank you so much. Yes.
Okay, take care. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please remember to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you won't miss any episodes. Figure 8 isn't just a podcast. It's a way of seeing the big, gorgeous goals of women entrepreneurs coming to life. If you're interested in learning more, you can find my book, Big Gorgeous Goals, on Amazon anywhere you might live. For more about my growth and leadership training programs, visit www.julieellis.ca to see how we might work together. Read my blog or sign up to get your free diagnostic. Are you ready for growth? Once again, that's www.julieellis.ca. When we work together, we all win. See you again soon for another episode of Figure 8.